In 1982, the future of the motorcycle walked into a Honda showroom. And just so nobody could possibly miss it, Honda stamped the word turbo onto the bodywork in 5 separate places. This was the Honda CX500 Turbo, red and chrome and absolutely covered in badges. It was the first factory-built, mass-produced turbocharged motorcycle in the world. It had electronic fuel injection when almost nothing on 2 wheels did. It ran a tiny turbocharger spinning up 19 pounds of boost, roughly double what most turbocharged cars were running that same year. And it cost nearly $5,000, well over what a fast, conventional motorcycle cost at the time. The magazines of the day called it the most complicated production motorcycle ever attempted. And it was glorious. Within about a year, every other Japanese giant had one too. Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki. All 4 of them, all at once, betting that this was where motorcycles were going. A small engine, a huge power figure, and a whining turbo doing the work of an engine twice its size. And they were fast. Some of them were genuinely, teeth-clenchingly fast. The Kawasaki version made 112 horsepower in 1984. In 1984, that was superbike money. And then, almost as quickly as they arrived, all 4 of those companies quietly killed them off. The whole factory turbo era ran for barely 4 model years. By the middle of the decade, the turbo bike was already a ghost, sitting under a dust cover in the back of a garage. Here is the part that makes this story insane. They did not stop because turbos did not work. They stopped because those same 4 companies had already built something faster, cheaper, and simpler, and the machine that buried the turbo bike was sitting in their own showrooms the entire time. So grab a coffee. Because to understand why Japan killed the motorcycle it had just invented, you have to go back to why it built the thing in the first place. Rewind to the very start of the 1980s. Turbo was the most exciting word in all of machinery. It was on Formula One cars. It was on rally cars. It was on little pocket rocket hatchbacks with a whistling Snail badge on the tailgate. If a vehicle had a turbo, it was from the future, and everybody knew it. The idea underneath all that hype is actually simple. A naturally aspirated engine has to fill its cylinders using nothing but the pressure of the air around it. The amount of oxygen it can cram in there sets the ceiling on how much fuel it can burn, and therefore how much power it can make. A turbocharger tears that ceiling off. It grabs the hot exhaust gas the engine was about to throw away, uses it to spin a little turbine, and that turbine spins a compressor that rams a denser charge of air into the engine under pressure. More oxygen means you can burn more fuel, and more fuel means far more power out of the very same size of engine. Pack dramatically more air into a 500 cubic centimeter engine, and suddenly it can punch far above its displacement. On paper, that is a miracle. A small, light engine that hits like a big one. And for a motorcycle, where every single kilogram matters, that sounded like the perfect answer. But a motorcycle is a brutal place to put a turbo. There is no room. There is no big engine bay to tuck it into, so the turbo and all of its plumbing has to hang off a motor that is already sitting out in the open air. It makes enormous heat, inches from the rider's leg, and the early turbos of that era had a nasty habit called lag. The turbo needed a hard rush of exhaust to spin up to speed, and the long runs of intake and exhaust plumbing on some of these bikes only stretched that delay out. So you would crack the throttle open, nothing much would happen for a beat, and then the boost would arrive with a sudden shove, sometimes right in the middle of a corner. In a car, that is exciting. On a motorcycle, that can put you straight into a hedge. So the challenge was set. Take the most fashionable technology on the planet and bolt it onto the one vehicle least suited to carry it. Honda went first, and Honda did not do it halfway. When the CX500 Turbo landed, it was less a motorcycle and more a rolling engineering flex. The base bike was an odd little thing to begin with, a 497 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled V-twin with shaft drive, the kind of steady, sensible machine couriers rode all day long. On its own, it made about 50 horsepower. Honda bolted a turbocharger from the aerospace supplier IHI onto it, added the first fuel injection system ever fitted to a Honda road bike, and the power leapt to a claimed 82 horsepower. On the dyno, it was closer to 78. Either way, Honda had found roughly 60% more power without adding a single cubic centimeter of engine, and they went enormous on the boost. That little turbo could shove air in at 19.3 pounds per square inch. For comparison, most turbocharged cars of the day ran about half of that. This was a wild amount of pressure for any road vehicle, and this was one you sat directly on top of. They wrapped the whole thing in wind tunnel-shaped bodywork, gave it clever anti-dive front forks and a single-shock rear end, and then, in case the point had somehow been missed, they wrote the word turbo on it in at least 5 different places. Owners loved that. Telling somebody your motorcycle was turbocharged back then earned you a reaction somewhere between admiration and genuine concern. There was just one problem, and it was the price tag. The CX500 Turbo listed at $4,898. That is roughly $17,000 in today's money, and it was a lot more than a fast conventional 750 cost at the time. You were paying supercar technology prices for a mid-size Honda that a good naturally aspirated bike could stay right beside in a straight line. Honda built only 5,343 of them, and just over 2,500 of those went to the United States. It was a one-year machine, built for 1982 alone, and it launched at the exact moment the motorcycle market was about to fall off a cliff. But the arms race was already running. The other 3 could not let Honda own the future by itself. Yamaha answered first, with the XJ650 Seca Turbo, and it may quietly have been the smartest of the entire bunch. Instead of copying Honda's high-tech fuel injection, Yamaha kept things simple and stuck with carburetors. The Seca Turbo looked completely unhinged, all sharp angles and wedge shapes, like something drawn for a cartoon set in the future. But underneath that styling, it was the mechanically simplest of the 4, and it earned a reputation among owners as the most dependable turbo of the bunch. Then came Suzuki, and Suzuki built the strangest one of all. The 1983 XN85 took its name straight from its power output, 85 horsepower, out of a 673 cubic centimeter 4-cylinder engine. It was beautiful, styled off Suzuki's famous Katana, and it was among the very first production road bikes anywhere to run a 16-inch front wheel, part of a chassis package that made it handle superbly. Testers at the time raved about how it went around corners, but Suzuki mounted the turbo behind the cylinders, and that created a real problem. The exhaust had to run down from the cylinder head, underneath the engine, all the way back, and then up again before it finally reached the turbo. By the time those gases arrived, they had shed a big chunk of their energy, which made the turbo slower to wake up. It packaged neatly on the bike. It also baked extra lag straight into the design. Suzuki built barely 1,150 of them, which makes the XN85 the rarest Japanese production turbo bike ever sold. Hold that thought, because what happened to the unsold XN85s is one of the strangest little tales in all of motorcycling. Honda, meanwhile, was not finished. For 1983, it bored the turbo motor out to 674 cubic centimeters, called it the CX650 Turbo, and pushed the power up to 100 horsepower. It was better than the 500 in almost every measurable way, and it lasted exactly 1 model year before Honda pulled the plug. Only 1,777 were ever made, because the loudest, angriest, fastest turbo of them all was still on its way, and it arrived tangled up in an actual trade war. To understand that last turbo bike, you first have to understand what was happening to Harley-Davidson. By the early 1980s, Harley was in serious trouble. As recently as 1972, the American company had effectively owned the entire United States market for motorcycles of 1,000 cubic centimeters and up. A single decade later, hammered by better and cheaper Japanese machines, its share of that class had crashed below 15%. Its warehouses were stuffed full of bikes it could not sell. The unsold inventory had doubled. The Japanese were undercutting it by as much as $2,000 per motorcycle. Harley was staring straight at the end, so Harley went to Washington and asked for protection. And in April 1983, President Ronald Reagan gave it to them. He signed an order that raised the tariff on imported motorcycles over 700 cubic centimeters from 4.4% to a brutal 49.4% in the first year, set to taper back down over the following 5. At the time, Japanese manufacturers made up around 80% of America's heavyweight motorcycle imports, so the tax was aimed squarely at them. There was a catch built into it, a quota that let a set number of Japanese bikes through each year at the old low rate, and any motorcycle assembled on American soil was exempt entirely. But for a big Japanese bike shipped in from overseas and outside that quota, the cost of doing business in America had just exploded. The Japanese response was fast and clever. Yamaha and Honda simply started building engines just under the limit, at 699 cubic centimeters, to dodge the tariff completely. The Yamaha Virago dropped from 750 to 699. And Kawasaki did something even bolder. It shifted more of its big bike assembly, including the one turbo it was about to launch, to a factory it already ran in Lincoln, Nebraska. Build the bike on American soil, and the tariff could not touch it. So when the Kawasaki GPz750 Turbo finally arrived, this futuristic Japanese rocket was quietly being screwed together in the American Midwest, specifically to sidestep a tax designed to save Harley-Davidson. That is the entire era compressed into a single sentence, and it helped. The tariff gave Harley some breathing room, though it was never the whole story. The company was also rebuilding its factories, fixing its quality, and readying much better machines of its own. By 1987, with years of protection still left on the clock, Harley walked back into Washington and asked the government to end the tariff early. Its chief executive, Vaughn Beals, put it about as plainly as a man can. Harley was profitable again, he said, recapitalized, diversified, and no longer in need of any help. Quick one before the twist in this story. If you are into forgotten motorcycle history like this, do hit subscribe, because digging up exactly these kinds of machines is what I do here every week. Now, back to that Kawasaki. The GPz750 Turbo was the machine that finally delivered on the whole fantasy. It made a claimed 112 horsepower from just 738 cubic centimeters. It was savage. It was the fastest of all 4 turbos. Period road tests ran it through the quarter mile in the low to mid 11-second range, and it stayed in production the longest, right through 1985. Kawasaki even advertised it as the world's fastest production turbocharged bike. If any turbo motorcycle was ever going to prove the concept, it was this one. And it is the one that accidentally proved the exact opposite. Because here's the thing that all 4 companies worked out at almost the same moment. The entire reason to turbocharge a motorcycle was to squeeze big bike power out of a small bike engine. That was the whole pitch. But it turned out there was a far, far easier way to get big bike power. You just build a bigger engine. A bigger, naturally aspirated engine had no lag to wait through. It did not cook the rider's leg. It did not need the turbo, the boost plumbing, the wastegate, and all the extra hardware it takes to force feed an engine under pressure. It was cheaper to build, it was lighter to carry, and it made its power in a smooth, predictable line you could actually use out on a real road. And by the middle of the 1980s, the Japanese factories were getting very, very good at building exactly that. The proof came from Kawasaki, and it was brutal because it was self-inflicted. In that same year, 1984, right alongside its own GPz750 Turbo, Kawasaki launched a naturally aspirated bike called the GPz900R, better known as the very first Ninja. Its 908 cubic centimeter engine made about 115 horsepower with no turbo at all. It hit 151 miles per hour, which made it the first stock production motorcycle in history to break 150, a barrier the turbo itself never touched. It made a little more power than the turbo. It delivered all of it instantly with no boost to wait for, and it did not cost a penny more. Sit with that for a second. Kawasaki built a turbocharged flagship, and then, in the very same showroom, in the very same year, it parked a simpler, cheaper, naturally aspirated bike that beat it. The Ninja was not just better than the Turbo, it became the template for the modern sport bike, the design everyone would copy for the next 20 years. And the money made the choice obvious. The GPz750 Turbo carried a price tag right around $4,500, almost exactly the same as Kawasaki's own naturally aspirated GPz1100 and Suzuki's big 1100 Katana. Why pay turbo money and live with the lag and the heat when the plain, proven, air-cooled 4 cost the same and made just as much power? Most riders looked at that and simply bought the normal bike, and Suzuki had already done the same thing to itself. Right around the time of the turbocharged XN85, Suzuki also sold a plain motorcycle called the GS750 ES. It had no turbo, and it was around 30 pounds lighter than the XN85. It cost well over $1,000 less, and out on a real road, it was every bit as quick. Suzuki's own ordinary bike matched or beat its space-age turbo bike on the numbers that actually mattered. That is what killed the turbo era. Turbocharging itself worked fine. The bikes just ended up heavy, expensive, and complicated at the exact moment ordinary motorcycles were getting faster at a frightening rate. The companies simply out-engineered their own future. The turbo motorcycle had become, in the words of one writer, a solution to a problem that no longer existed. So yes, in a way, these bikes really were too fast for their own good. They sprinted toward a future that a plain, cheaper, faster motorcycle reached first. Once that truth was out in the open, the turbo bikes had nowhere left to go. The market was soft, these things were expensive to build, and the accountants who had been holding their breath finally exhaled. Honda dropped its turbo. Yamaha dropped its turbo. Suzuki dropped its turbo. One by one, the future got canceled. Only Kawasaki held on, and even Kawasaki quit after 1985. Which brings us right back to Suzuki's XN85, and that strange little tale I promised you. Remember, Suzuki built only around 1,150 of them, and just 300 ever reached the United States, sold for a single model year. The bike simply did not sell. And then comes the strangest chapter of the whole story, though I want to be honest about how solid it is. According to accounts passed down by longtime owners and former dealers, at least some of the unsold XN85s were recalled and destroyed once it was clear they would never find buyers. Some versions of the story describe bikes being partly dismantled first, the serial numbered engine cases cut away before the rest was scrapped. But the exact numbers, the countries involved, and what Suzuki actually ordered are poorly documented, and Suzuki has never confirmed any of it. So treat this part as enthusiast folklore rather than settled fact. And if those accounts are even partly true, it is a quietly extraordinary ending. A company builds a genuinely innovative machine, the rarest of its entire kind, and then lets it slip out of the record almost on purpose. That is roughly how badly the whole industry wanted to forget the turbo experiment had ever happened. Today, of course, the survivors are worth real money, precisely because so few of them are left. The bikes everyone laughed at or ignored are now prized collector pieces. Little chrome time capsules from the few short years when Japan was convinced the entire future ran on boost. So, were the Japanese turbo bikes a failure? It honestly depends on how you choose to measure it. They did not take over the world. They did not even survive their own decade. Judged purely as products, 4 out of 4 flopped, and a couple of them flopped spectacularly. But they were never really about sales. They were 4 companies at the absolute peak of their confidence, flexing, showing off, hurling the most advanced technology on Earth at 2 wheels just to find out if they could. They were beautiful, ridiculous dead ends. And the engineering did not vanish. The fuel injection, the electronics, the aerodynamics, all of it fed straight into the motorcycles we ride today. And forced induction was not gone forever either. It just took 30 years, and it came back wearing a slightly different badge. In 2015, Kawasaki, and of course it was Kawasaki, released the Ninja H2, a road-legal hyperbike with a supercharger bolted to the engine, making the kind of power the 1980s could only fantasize about. The future the turbo bikes promised did finally arrive. It was just fashionably, absurdly late. And here is the strange lesson sitting underneath all of it. The most advanced machine does not always win. Sometimes the future loses. Not to something better, but to something simpler and cheaper, sitting right next to it on the same showroom floor. Which raises a fairly uncomfortable question about a few of the machines we are all being sold as the future right now. But that is a whole other story, and I have got one lined up for you right there.